The note on the black marble. Nightshade was the kind of restaurant that didn't feel real, black marble floors that swallowed footsteps, chandeliers that glittered like frozen starlight, and velvet booths where the city's richest people whispered like they were afraid the walls might remember. Charlotte Reed didn't belong in Nightshade. She belonged in places with fluorescent lights and chipped mugs, where people said please without looking like it hurt them. But rent didn't care about dignity, and the city didn't care about a girl who'd grown up learning how to be small so nobody would notice her need. So Charlotte wore the uniform. She tied the apron tight. She kept her eyes down. She smiled even when people snapped their fingers at her like she was a dog. And she survived. That night, her manager had already warned her twice. "Table 12 is the kind of money we can't offend," he hissed, shoving a tray into her hands. "No mistakes. No dilas. And for the love of God, don't stare." Charlotte didn't ask who Table 12 was. At Nightshade you didn't ask. You learned by watching. And when she walked toward the eastern windows, she understood immediately why her manager looked like he'd swallowed fear. The man at the corner table wasn't just wealthy. Wealth had a warmth to it sometimes. Laugh lines, casual arrogance, laughter that filled the air. This man had none of that. He sat as if the chair had been designed around him, perfectly still, perfectly composed. His suit was black but not modern black, deeper like the absence of color itself. Candlelight kissed his cheekbones and slid away like it couldn't find a place to rest. His eyes were pale. Not light brown pale. Winter moon pale. And beside him sat a woman who looked like she belonged on billboards. Perfect hair, perfect dress, perfect smile. A woman whose laughter sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced in mirrors. Charlotte's throat tightened. Because she'd seen that woman before. 15 minutes earlier, Charlotte had been in the powder room, hiding in the far stall, clutching her phone like it was a life raft. It was her 5-minute break, the kind that never truly belonged to her, because even breaks in Nightshade felt like borrowed time. She'd been scrolling job listings she didn't qualify for when she heard heels. Designer heels. Sharp, confident clicks across marble. Then perfume, dark, expensive, the kind that could make a whole room feel smaller. A voice floated through the stall partition. "Oh, smooth. Certain it was private." "I told you he'll be at the corner table," the woman said. Charlotte froze. Her thumb stopped moving. A pause as if someone on the other end replied. "The hunters are already inside," the woman continued. "One at the bar. 3 near the kitchen entrance. Clear lines the moment he settles." Charlotte's breath stopped. "Hunters?" Water ran at the sink. The woman's voice dropped even softer. "Use silver-tipped bolts. Crossbows, not guns, too much attention otherwise." Pause. A faint laugh like a cruel little secret. "His era ends tonight." The words hung in the bathroom like smoke. Then the woman switched languages, fluid and ancient, syllables that sounded like old stone and bloodline vows. Charlotte didn't understand the words, but she understood the intent. It was the tone of someone ordering a death. Charlotte stayed frozen in the stall, praying her worn sneakers wouldn't be seen beneath the partition. Minutes stretched. 7. 8. Finally the door opened and closed again. The heels clicked away down the corridor. Only then did Charlotte stumble out, pale and shaking, staring at her own reflection like she might recognize the girl who'd just heard something she couldn't unheard. Back on the floor she watched with new eyes. One man at the bar, nursing the same drink for too long, posture too ready. 3 men near the kitchen, barely touching their food, eyes sweeping the room like they were measuring distances. And at the corner table by the eastern window, the man everyone at Nightshade whispered about when they thought servers couldn't hear. Keldron Crowfell. Old money, they said. Older family, they whispered. The kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. Charlotte had served him twice before. He hadn't looked at her either time. But tonight she wasn't just a waitress. Tonight she was the only person in the room who knew the trap. The woman from the powder room, Fiona Whitmore, sat across from him smiling into her phone, radiant and effortless. A ring on her finger caught the candlelight and threw it back like a blade. Fiancé. Charlotte's stomach turned. Her hands shook as she approached. She set down the crystal goblet, red liquid inside that she prayed was wine and not something else. She placed the folded receipt beside his glass like it was just another part of service. But the ink on the receipt wasn't a total. It was a confession. Your fiancé sold you out. They're in position. Charlotte forced her voice steady. Anything else for you or your guest this evening, sir? Fiona laughed without looking up. No. Her voice had sugar in it. Sugar can hide poison. Keldron didn't look at Charlotte at first. He lifted the goblet, elegant and unhurried. Then his gaze dipped. To the paper. Charlotte's heart hammered so hard she thought the whole dining room might hear it. Read it, she begged silently. Please, please read it now. Because in 30 seconds she would have to walk away. In 30 seconds men with silver-tipped bolts would move. In 30 seconds Charlotte Reed would either save a man who felt like winter-wearing skin, or she would die for trying. Keldron's fingers touched the edge of the receipt. They were too pale. Too still. He unfolded the paper with a precision that said he'd opened threats before, many of them, and survived every single one. His eyes tracked across Charlotte's shaky handwriting. And something shifted in his face. Not fear. Nothing as human as fear. His expression went blank, smooth as marble. In that blankness Charlotte recognized something older than money, older than the city. A predator who had just scented an ambush. Fiona leaned forward, her smile tightening. That'll be all, Charlotte. Charlotte's legs wanted to obey. Her body wanted to retreat back into invisibility. But Keldron's hand moved, just a slight gesture, almost imperceptible. Stay. It wasn't a word. It was a command that landed in Charlotte's bones like gravity. So she stayed. At the bar the man swiveled. A hand slipped inside his jacket. Charlotte's vision sharpened with terror. Keldron's head turned with mechanical precision. Down. Someone shouted. Charlotte didn't think. Her body moved before her mind could argue. She lunged forward and slammed her palm into Keldron's shoulder, hard. Keldron shifted sideways an inch, and a silver bolt screamed past where his heart had been. It struck the wall behind him with a crack like lightning, the tip glowing faintly in candlelight. For half a heartbeat, the restaurant went silent. Then everything exploded. Screams. Shattering glass. Velvet turning into chaos. More bolts slammed into the marble table. Stones splintered like brittle ice. Keldron moved. Nothing human moved like that. One moment he was seated. The next, he was a blur of black fabric and impossible grace, an arm locking around Charlotte's shoulders, hauling her down as the table shattered above them. Two men in dark suits appeared as if the shadows had given birth to them, intercepting the hunters with the same terrible speed. The man from the bar was tackled so hard his crossbow clattered across the floor. The three by the kitchen tried to run. They didn't get far. It was over in seconds, not peaceful but controlled. Like a storm directed by an unseen hand. Patrons pressed against walls, sobbing, stumbling toward exits. Some were filming until a dark-suited man took their phones with a quiet, almost polite efficiency. Charlotte's ears rang. Silver bolts lay scattered like fallen stars. Keldron pulled back, both hands still gripping Charlotte's shoulders. Up close she saw what she'd missed before. The stillness in his features. The way candlelight didn't reflect quite right in his eyes. The utter absence of warmth, yet not cruelty. Something else. Something ancient. Your name, he said. It wasn't a question. It was velvet wrapped around steel. Charlotte swallowed. Charlotte. Charlotte Reed. He repeated it slowly like memorizing a spell. Charlotte Reed. His gaze flicked to the bolt embedded in the wall. Then back to her. You pushed me. Charlotte's voice shook. I saw him move. I just reacted. Something flickered in Keldron's face, too fast to name. Not softness. Not yet. But not indifference either. His grip tightened, gentle but unyielding. As if he'd decided something and the universe would simply have to agree. You will stay exactly where I can see you, he said quietly. Charlotte's breath caught. I don't think you understand what just happened here, he continued. Then he leaned closer, and the air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. Do you understand? Charlotte should have been terrified. She was. But underneath the fear there was something else, an unwanted, dangerous relief. Because for the first time in her life, someone powerful had looked at her like she mattered. Like she existed. And in the wreckage of Nightshade, with silver bolts on the floor and Fiona Whitmore nowhere to be seen, Charlotte understood one thing with crystal clarity. Her ordinary life had ended. The fortress behind the iron gates. The man who escorted Charlotte out of Nightshade moved like a shadow that had learned manners. He introduced himself in the alley, voice calm, posture perfect. Miss Reed. I'm Matthias. Please stay close. Charlotte didn't argue. She couldn't. Her body was still catching up to what her eyes had seen. Men moving too fast. Silver weapons. The way Keldron had looked at her like her name was a key. A black vehicle waited, sleek, armored, windows too thick to be normal. Matthias opened the rear door. Charlotte slid in. Leather seats swallowed her, expensive and cold. The door shut, sealing her inside a silence so complete it made her ears ring. Outside, police lights painted the alley blue and red. Through tinted glass, Charlotte saw Keldron emerge from the back entrance of Nightshade as if nothing had happened. He spoke to a detective, and the detective nodded like every word was law. Power like that didn't demand. It simply existed. The drive took 40 minutes, moving away from the parts of the city Charlotte knew. Buildings thinned. Streets widened. Trees appeared like quiet guards. Then iron gates. Stone walls. A mansion that wasn't a mansion. A fortress. Gothic stone rose against the night sky, windows glowing amber, gargoyles perched like warnings. Ivy climbed walls that looked older than the city itself. Charlotte's hands clenched in her lap. Where are we? Matthias's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. Home. Charlotte didn't correct him. Because it wasn't her home. But something in the way he said it made her feel like it might become one, whether she wanted it or not. Inside, the air smelled like polished wood and old secrets. Corridors stretched like veins through the heart of the fortress. Every surface whispered luxury. Tapestries that belonged in museums, chandeliers dripping crystal, portraits whose eyes seemed too alive. Matthias led her to a guest suite that was bigger than Charlotte's entire apartment. A 4-poster bed. Velvet curtains. A fireplace that looked ceremonial. You'll be safe here, Matthias said. Try to rest. Mr. Crowfell will speak with you in the morning. Rest. Charlotte stared at the door after he left, then down at her hands. She was still wearing her waitress uniform. Still wearing the cheap shoes she'd prayed nobody would notice in the powder room. But now she was inside a vampire king's fortress. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her stomach sank. She opened it. A photo, Charlotte in her uniform walking to her car last week. Another, her apartment building. Another, the attack at Nightshade, zoomed in on her face as she shoved Keldron aside. Then a message. We know which human interfered. The Bloodstone Covenant does not forget. Leave the city in 3 days. Stay under Crowfell's protection, and you die with him. Charlotte's fingers went numb. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. A knock came, soft but final. The door opened before Charlotte could answer. Keldron stepped inside. Matthias stood behind him, silent as a blade. Keldron's eyes went to Charlotte's face, then to the phone on the floor. Show me, he said. Charlotte's voice cracked. I got this. Keldron picked up the phone, reading the message once. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Not magically, no sudden wind, no dramatic special effects. Just the feeling of standing too close to something lethal. He handed the phone back with perfect calm. But his voice was older than calm. Matthias, he said quietly. Triple the perimeter. No one enters or leaves without my authorization. Matthias nodded and vanished. Keldron's gaze returned to Charlotte. You will not be leaving my protection, Miss Reed? Charlotte's throat tightened. I didn't ask for this. No, he agreed. You didn't. He moved closer and Charlotte had to fight the instinct to step back. He didn't invade her space like a man claiming something. He approached like a storm considering whether to spare a village. Then why me? She whispered. Why did I hear her? Why was I the one? Keldron's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Because you chose, he said. Charlotte blinked. Chose what? You could have stayed silent, he said. You could have protected yourself by pretending you heard nothing. Charlotte's chest tightened. But he would have died, Keldron finished softly. The word landed heavy. Charlotte's voice was small. I didn't do it for you. Keldron tilted his head. Then for what? Charlotte's eyes stung. For the idea that it's wrong. That people don't get to decide someone's life ends just because it benefits them. For the first time, something almost human flickered in his face. Not warmth, but recognition. Respect, sharp and unfamiliar. Keldron turned toward the window, blackout curtains sealed tight. You heard Fiona, he said. You recognized the hunters. You understood Silver. I've seen movies, Charlotte said weakly, trying to make it smaller, safer. Keldron's mouth curved, barely. How disappointingly accurate they've become. Charlotte hugged her arms. So it's true. You're a vampire, he said as if stating his name. Yes. Charlotte's heart hammered. And Fiona, she's a vampire too? Yes, Keldron said. And worse than that, she is Whitmore. Charlotte didn't understand the weight of the word, but she felt it in the way he said it. Fiona was meant to be a political alliance, Keldron continued. House Whitmore joined with House Crowfell. Stability. Consolidation. Peace. And she betrayed you, Charlotte whispered. She attempted to, Keldrin corrected. There was no arrogance in it. Just fact. Charlotte's voice trembled. What? Why would she do that? Keldrin's eyes darkened. Because there are vampires who believe hiding among humans is weakness. They want open rule. Control. The Bloodstone Covenant, Charlotte said. Keldrin nodded once. They want this city, he said. They want me removed. Charlotte swallowed. And now they want me too. Keldrin's gaze held hers. Because you became inconvenient, he said. A human who saw behind the curtain. A human who interfered. Charlotte's breath shook. I don't have money. I don't have power. I'm just... Keldrin stepped closer, voice dropping like velvet over a blade. You are not just anything. Charlotte froze. The words were simple. But no one had ever said them to her like they were true. Keldrin's eyes searched her face, as if he could read every bruise the world had left on her spirit. Then he said the sentence that turned Charlotte's blood cold and warm at the same time. They threatened you, he murmured. So they threaten what is mine. Charlotte's mouth went dry. Mean it. Keldrin didn't touch her. He didn't need to. The air between them felt charged, as if something old and invisible had shifted the moment she shoved him aside. You saved me, he said, voice low. And in doing so you stepped into my world. Charlotte whispered, I didn't mean to. Keldrin's gaze softened, just a fraction. Intent doesn't change consequence, he said. But your heart is unusual. Charlotte's eyes stung. Unusual isn't safe. Keldrin nodded as if he respected that truth. No, he said. It isn't. He turned toward the door. Then paused, looking back over his shoulder. Sleep, he ordered gently. If you can. Charlotte's voice shook. And if I can't? Keldrin's eyes held hers like a promise. Then you will not be alone in the dark, he said. And he left. Charlotte stood in the silence of the enormous room, heart pounding, phone clenched in her hand. Outside, somewhere beyond stone walls and iron gates, the Bloodstone Covenant had marked her. And inside, in a fortress where the night itself seemed to bow, Charlotte realized she'd become something she'd never been before. The fiancé who lied and the fiancé the night chose. Morning didn't feel like morning inside Crowfell's fortress. No sunlight touched the halls. Curtains stayed closed. The air stayed cool and quiet like the house itself slept while the world outside lived. Charlotte didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed until her legs cramped, replaying the attack again and again. The bolt. The shift. The way Keldrin moved like the laws of physics were optional. Around dawn a soft knock came. Matthias entered, carrying a tray with coffee and food that looked too beautiful to touch. Mr. Crowfell requests your presence, he said. Charlotte's stomach twisted. Where? The solarium. Charlotte followed him through corridors until they reached a room that should have been filled with sun. Instead, blackout curtains sealed every window. Plants lived in low light, unnatural but thriving, like they'd been trained to survive the absence of warmth. Keldrin sat in a leather chair, reading from a tablet, an immortal king holding modern technology like it was nothing. He looked up as Charlotte entered. Sit, he said. Charlotte sat because her knees felt weak. She didn't bother with politeness. Fear had burned that out of her overnight. I want answers, she said. Real ones. Keldrin studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Yes, he said. You do. He set the tablet aside. What did you think I was, he asked, when you wrote that note? Charlotte's voice came out honest. Dangerous. Keldrin's eyes flickered. True. Powerful, she added. And, alone. Silence. Keldrin's jaw tightened slightly as if she'd touched something sharp inside him. I am 317 years old, he said at last. I died in 1724 and woke to a different kind of life. Charlotte's pulse thundered, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. He continued, voice controlled. For 3 centuries I have ruled this city's vampire hierarchy. Not through inheritance. Through strength, strategy, and an unwillingness to let ambitious fools turn my territory into a battlefield. Charlotte whispered, and Fiona? Keldrin's expression hardened. Fiona Whitmore was meant to be an alliance, he said. House Whitmore and House Crowfell. A public engagement to prevent civil war. Charlotte's throat tightened. So she wasn't loved? Keldrin's voice was flat. No. Charlotte didn't know whether to be relieved for him or afraid of what that meant. She wanted my throne, Keldrin continued. And the Bloodstone Covenant promised her power. Charlotte's hands curled into fists. So she used humans to try to kill you. Keldrin's eyes sharpened. Yes. Charlotte swallowed. What happens to her now? Pause. Then Keldrin said quietly, that depends on what she tries next. Matthias stepped forward. My lord, the hunters captured at Nightshade have been moved to holding. Keldrin's gaze didn't waver. Good. Charlotte's stomach rolled. You're going to kill them? Keldrin's eyes shifted to her. And in that moment, Charlotte realized something important. He wasn't looking for permission. He was watching her moral spine. If I release them, Keldrin said, they return to the Covenant and the Covenant sends more. Charlotte's voice trembled. There has to be another way. Keldrin leaned back, studying her like she was an equation. There may be, he said. Charlotte blinked. Maybe. Keldrin's voice softened a fraction. That is why you are here. Charlotte froze. Me? You heard Fiona switch languages, he said. You said you couldn't place it. Charlotte nodded. It sounded old. Keldrin's eyes narrowed. Repeat it. Charlotte's mouth went dry. I don't remember. You do, Keldrin said, and his voice wasn't harsh. It was certainty. Charlotte squeezed her eyes shut, dredging the memory up from fear. She repeated a few syllables awkward on her tongue. The moment the sounds left her lips, Keldrin went still. Matthias went still. The air in the room felt like it tightened. Keldrin rose slowly from his chair. What was that? Charlotte whispered. Keldrin approached her, not like a predator now, like a man walking toward the answer to a question he didn't want. Say it again, he murmured. Charlotte did. Keldrin's eyes flashed, something ancient stirring behind them. That is not a modern tongue, he said quietly. That is Old Valen. Charlotte swallowed. Okay, and? Keldrin's voice dropped. It is a language only spoken in the first vampire courts. Only nobles were taught it. And only one bloodline kept it alive. Charlotte's heart pounded. Which bloodline? Keldrin's eyes locked on hers. Mine, he said. Charlotte's skin went cold. That's impossible, she whispered. I'm human. I grew up in foster homes. I don't have some secret. Keldrin's hand lifted. Not to touch her. Just to hover near her face like he was resisting instinct. You spoke it imperfectly, he said, but you recognized the rhythm. That means you have heard it before. Or, it has heard you. Charlotte's breath shook. What does that mean? Matthias spoke carefully. My lord, the old prophecies. Keldrin's eyes snapped to him. Do not. Matthias fell silent. Charlotte looked between them. What prophecies? Keldrin's jaw worked once as if he hated every word he was about to say. There is a vow in House Crowfell, he said. A bond older than my rule. A promise that the true queen would come not from vampire bloodlines, but from the fragile world we hide among. Charlotte's voice cracked. You're saying, me? Keldrin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped back as if he needed distance to speak truth. You saved my life, he said. You heard my enemy. You spoke my house's oldest tongue. Charlotte's eyes stung. That doesn't make me your queen. Keldrin's gaze sharpened with something like pain. No, he said softly. But it makes you a target. Charlotte's chest tightened. Because the Covenant would never allow it. Keldrin nodded. And Fiona, Charlotte whispered, pieces falling into place, she wasn't just trying to kill you. She was trying to prevent, whatever this is. Keldrin's voice turned lethal. Yes. Charlotte's hands shook in her lap. I don't want a throne. I don't want any of this. Keldrin's eyes softened, barely. I know, he said. And that single sentence, spoken with such quiet certainty, broke something in Charlotte. Because no one had ever believed her before. No one had ever looked at her fear and said, I know, as if her feelings mattered. Keldrin turned away, voice controlled. We will keep you protected. Charlotte whispered, and if I don't want protection? Keldrin looked back at her, and for the first time, the cold king's mask slipped enough for Charlotte to see what lived beneath it. Loneliness. Old, vast loneliness. If you leave, he said quietly, they will kill you to punish me. Charlotte's breath caught. And if I keep you, Keldrin continued, they will come anyway. Charlotte stared at him. So what do we do? Keldrin's eyes narrowed with decision. We end the Covenant's illusion of safety, he said. We expose Fiona's betrayal to her own people. Charlotte's throat tightened. How? Keldrin's gaze held hers like a vow. By making you visible, he said. Charlotte's voice was small. Visible how? Keldrin's expression didn't soften, but his voice did, dangerous in its gentleness. By naming you, he said, as what the old world would call you. Charlotte barely managed, which is? Keldron stepped closer and the air seemed to bow. "My fiancé," he said. Charlotte's heart stopped. Not because she wanted it. Not because she didn't. Because the word wasn't romantic. It was war. The Crimson Court and the price of kindness. They dressed Charlotte like she was someone else. Not in a humiliating way. Not like a doll. But like a declaration. A seamstress arrived, silent, careful, eyes lowered like she was in the presence of a storm. The dress she brought wasn't flashy. It was elegant. Deep midnight blue, as if it had stolen color from the sky. Charlotte stared at her reflection afterward and barely recognized herself. She still looked like Charlotte. But also, like the kind of woman people would finally stop interrupting. Matthias escorted her through corridors into a private hall where Keldron waited. He wore black, always black, but tonight it looked ceremonial. A long coat with subtle embroidery that hinted at old symbols, old vows. When he saw Charlotte, he went still. For a heartbeat, the cold king forgot to be cold. Then his face returned to its controlled calm. "You are trembling," he said. Charlotte tried to laugh. It came out thin. "I'm going to a vampire court. I think trembling is reasonable." Keldron stepped closer. His voice lowered. "You do not have to be fearless," he said. "You only have to be honest." Charlotte's throat tightened. Honest gets people hurt. Keldron's gaze held hers. Kindness gets people hurt too. Charlotte blinked. He didn't say it like an accusation. He said it like he'd learned it the hard way. They traveled underground, through tunnels beneath the city, ancient stone corridors that smelled like time. Keldron's fortress wasn't just a home. It was a kingdom. When they arrived, the Crimson Court waited. A vast chamber carved from black stone, lit by red flames that gave everything the look of a heartbeat. Vampires stood in elegant clusters, eyes tracking, voices low. When Keldron entered, the room changed. Not because people cheered. Because the air itself seemed to respect him. Charlotte stayed close to his side, trying not to flinch under hundreds of gazes that felt too sharp. At the far end of the chamber, a throne of carved obsidian sat like a warning. Keldron didn't sit. He stood. Because kings who sit announce comfort. Keldron announced control. A hush fell as Fiona Whitmore entered from the opposite archway. She looked flawless. Of course she did. Her smile was delicate, practiced, and her eyes glittered with something hungry. "My love," Fiona purred, approaching. Charlotte's skin crawled. Fiona's gaze slid to Charlotte with polite disdain. "Oh," Fiona said lightly. "A server. How charming." Charlotte's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to stay still. Keldron's voice cut through the room like ice. "Not a server." Fiona blinked, smile tightening. "Pardon?" Keldron extended his hand. Charlotte hesitated only a fraction before she placed her hand in his. His touch was cool, but steady. "Charlotte Reed," Keldron announced. "My fiancée." The chamber didn't explode. It shifted. Whispers ran like wind through a dead forest. Fiona's perfect mask cracked for half a second. Then she laughed, high, sweet, venomous. "My love," she said, "that's ridiculous. You are engaged to me." Keldron's eyes didn't move. "You were," he corrected. Fiona's gaze sharpened. "You cannot discard Whitmore." Keldron's voice stayed calm. "I can." Fiona's smile faltered. Then she recovered, turning to the court with practiced grace. "My king is clearly stressed," she said. "Tonight's incident at Nightshade, an unfortunate disturbance. But I assure you." Keldron lifted a hand. Silence fell instantly. "Unfortunate," he echoed. "Yes." Then he looked directly at Fiona. "And orchestrated." The room chilled. Fiona's eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you implying?" Keldron's voice didn't rise. He didn't need it to. "I heard you," he said. Fiona's smile froze. "Heard me where?" Keldron's gaze flicked to Charlotte. And Charlotte understood. This was the moment. Her mouth went dry. Keldron's voice softened, only for her. "Truth," he murmured. "Just truth." Charlotte took a breath that shook. Then she looked at the vampires staring at her like she was prey. And she said, clearly, loudly enough for the chamber to hear. "I heard Fiona Whitmore in the powder room at Nightshade," Charlotte said. "She told someone you would be at the eastern window table. She said hunters were already inside. She told them to use silver-tipped bolts." Gasps and murmurs rippled. Fiona's eyes flashed. "Liar." Charlotte's heart hammered, but she kept going. She said, "His era ends tonight," Charlotte said. Then she spoke in Old Valen. The room went deadly quiet. Fiona's face drained of color, not much but enough. Because in that moment, The court understood what Charlotte didn't fully grasp. Old Valen wasn't casual. It was a declaration of faction. A covenant tongue. Keldrin stepped forward, voice calm, lethal. The Bloodstone Covenant, he said. My fiancé invited them into a human venue to assassinate me. Fiona hissed, dropping the sweetness. You cannot prove. Keldrin lifted his hand. You were, he corrected. Fiona's gaze sharpened. You cannot discard Whitmore. Keldrin's voice stayed calm. I can. Fiona's smile faltered. Then she recovered, turning to the court with practiced grace. My king is clearly stressed, she said. Tonight's incident at Nightshade, an unfortunate disturbance. But I assure you. Keldrin lifted a hand. Silence fell instantly. Unfortunate, he echoed. Yes. Then he looked directly at Fiona. And orchestrated. The room chilled. Fiona's eyes narrowed slightly. What are you implying? Keldrin's voice didn't rise. He didn't need it to. I heard you, he said. Fiona's smile froze. Heard me where? Keldrin's gaze flicked to Charlotte. And Charlotte understood. This was the moment. Her mouth went dry. Keldrin's voice softened, only for her. Truth, he murmured. Just truth. Charlotte took a breath that shook. Then she looked at the vampire staring at her like she was prey. And she said, clearly, loudly enough for the chamber to hear. I heard Fiona Whitmore in the powder room at Nightshade, Charlotte said. She told someone you would be at the eastern window table. She said hunters were already inside. She told them to use silver-tipped bolts. Gasps and murmurs rippled. Fiona's eyes flashed. Liar. Charlotte's heart hammered, but she kept going. She said, his era ends tonight, Charlotte said. Then she spoke in Old Valen. The room went deadly quiet. Fiona's face drained of color, not much but enough. Because in that moment, the court understood what Charlotte didn't fully grasp. Old Valen wasn't casual. It was a declaration of faction. A covenant tongue. Keldrin stepped forward, voice calm, lethal. The Bloodstone Covenant, he said. My fiancé invited them into a human venue to assassinate me. Fiona hissed, dropping the sweetness. You cannot prove. Keldrin lifted his hand. Matthias emerged from shadow holding a small device. A recording. Fiona's own voice spilled into the chamber, low, confident, private. The hunters are already inside. Use the silver-tipped bolts. His era ends tonight. Fiona's eyes widened, then hardened. For a heartbeat, Charlotte saw the real Fiona beneath the mask. Ambition without mercy. Fiona's smile turned sharp. Fine, she said. Yes. I chose the covenant. Gasp. Fiona stepped closer to Keldrin, eyes gleaming. Because you are a coward, she said softly. Hiding among humans like they matter. Charlotte flinched. Fiona's gaze slid to her, cruel and delighted. And you brought one into our court. A fragile little thing. You want her to be queen? You want a human to stand beside you? Fiona leaned in as if sharing a secret. She will break, Fiona whispered. And when she does, your kingdom breaks with her. Charlotte's breath shook. Keldrin's voice turned colder than stone. She has already withstood what you never could, he said. Fiona's eyes narrowed. What? Kindness? Poverty? Humiliation? Charlotte's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. Yes, all of it. And still she warned him. The words surprised Charlotte as they left her mouth, because she realized they weren't just defense. They were truth. Fiona stared at her, then smiled slowly. Then let's see what your kindness costs, she said. The flames flickered. And from the shadows behind Fiona, figures emerged, covenant loyalists, eyes red with zeal. The court erupted. Keldrin moved instantly, pulling Charlotte behind him, not possessive, protective. His voice thundered through the chamber. No one touches her. The covenant didn't listen. Because they weren't afraid of law. They were afraid of prophecy. And prophecy had just walked in wearing a midnight blue dress. The queen the night didn't expect. The first thing Charlotte learned in the chaos of the Crimson Court was this. Vampire fights weren't loud like movies. They were fast. Terrifyingly fast. The room became motion. Black coats, flashing eyes, bodies moving like wind given sharp edges. Keldrin's guards formed a wall. Matthias appeared at Charlotte's side like he'd been born from shadow. Stay behind us, he ordered. Charlotte's hands shook. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't special. She was a girl who used to count coins to buy instant noodles. And now a vampire court was tearing itself apart because she existed. A covenant vampire lunged toward Charlotte. Keldrin moved. Not with rage. With precision. He intercepted, and the attacker crashed backward like they'd hit an invisible wall. Keldron didn't revel. He didn't gloat. He protected. That was what made him terrifying. And then Charlotte saw Fiona. Not fighting. Watching. Smiling. Because this wasn't about winning tonight. This was about proving a point. That a human would always be the weak link. Fiona's gaze locked on Charlotte and the smile sharpened. Then Fiona spoke, just a few words in Old Valen. The air changed. Charlotte's skin prickled as if the sound recognized something inside her. Matthias stiffened. My lord, she's invoking a binding? Keldron's eyes flared. Fiona. But Fiona's voice didn't stop. The flames in the chamber surged red. The shadows thickened. And Charlotte felt it, an invisible hook catching in her chest. Like a hand reaching inside her ribs. Charlotte gasped, staggering. Keldron spun toward her instantly, catching her before she fell. His cool hand steadied her. What did she do? Charlotte whispered, voice thin. Keldron's face tightened with something that looked like fear, rare, controlled, but real. She tried to bind you, he said. Charlotte's breath shook. Bind me to what? Keldron's gaze snapped to Fiona. To the covenant, he said. To force your blood to answer their call. Charlotte's eyes stung. I don't understand. Keldron's voice dropped. Old Valen is not only a language. It is a mechanism. A key. Charlotte's heart pounded. And I'm the lock. Keldron's jaw clenched. Yes. And that is why she wants you broken. Charlotte's vision blurred with tears she didn't want. I never asked to matter, she whispered. Keldron's gaze held hers, fierce and steady. I know, he said again. And in that moment something in Charlotte snapped. Not in a bad way. In the way a person stops shrinking. Stops apologizing for existing. Charlotte looked around. The court was chaos. Vampires clashed. Guards shielded. The covenant pushed like a tide. And Fiona Whitmore stood smiling, convinced the human girl would crumble. Charlotte lifted her chin. She didn't have claws. She didn't have speed. But she had something the covenant had forgotten humans could possess. Stubborn courage. Charlotte focused on Fiona and spoke, clumsy, imperfect, but clear enough. A single phrase in Old Valen. Not a curse. Not an attack. A refusal. The words felt like pushing against a current. Matthias froze, eyes widening. Keldron went utterly still. Fiona's smile disappeared. Because Charlotte's phrase wasn't random. It was a counter key, something that sounded like a vow being closed. The invisible hook in Charlotte's chest loosened. The pressure eased. Charlotte stumbled, breathing hard. Fiona's voice sharpened. How do you know that phrase? Charlotte's hands trembled, but her voice didn't. I don't know, she admitted. But I know what it means. Fiona's eyes narrowed. Charlotte swallowed, then said the truth as she understood it. Means, I belong to myself. Silence hit the chamber like a bell. Even in battle, vampires noticed. Because obedience was the oldest currency in their world. And a human had just declared sovereignty in the first court's tongue. Keldron's gaze burned with something Charlotte couldn't name, pride, shock, and something dangerously close to devotion. Fiona's face twisted with rage. She is not, Fiona began. Keldron's voice cut through the chamber like a verdict. She is, he said. And you will not touch her again. Fiona hissed, bearing what she truly was now, fangs flashing, elegance replaced by hunger. If I can't have your throne, she spat, I'll have your future. She lunged, not at Keldron. At Charlotte. Because Fiona didn't want a fair fight. She wanted a message. Keldron moved faster than thought. But Charlotte moved too, human slow, human desperate, human brave. Not to attack Fiona. To step forward. To stand. Because running would confirm Fiona's belief. Charlotte planted her feet and looked Fiona straight in the eyes. And in that second, Fiona hesitated. Just a fraction. Because no one expects prey to hold eye contact. That fraction was enough. Keldron intercepted Fiona, grabbing her wrist with a grip that stopped her like iron. His voice was low, terrifyingly calm. You tried to kill me, he said. You tried to weaponize a human. You tried to start war in a human restaurant. Fiona bared her teeth. You are weak. Keldron's eyes were winter. No, he said. I am restrained. He turned to the court, voice carrying. House Whitmore is stripped, he declared. The Bloodstone Covenant is exposed. Any who stand with them will be treated as enemies of this city's stability. The court erupted, not with cheers but with the sound of shifting loyalties. Because vampires loved power. But they loved survival more. Fiona screamed, struggling, but Matthias and the guards seized her. She glared at Charlotte, hate burning bright. "This isn't over," Fiona snarled. "You're human. You will break." Charlotte's hands trembled, but she answered quietly. "Maybe." Then she lifted her chin. "But not the way you want." Fiona was dragged away, screaming. The Covenant fighters faltered as the court turned against them. Those who could fled. Those who couldn't were disarmed and restrained. When the last echo of battle faded, the chamber stood in wrecked silence. Keldron turned toward Charlotte. For the first time he looked tired. Not physically. Soul tired. He approached her slowly, careful, like he was afraid he'd scare her if he moved too fast. Charlotte's voice shook. "So what happens now?" Keldron's eyes held hers, honest. "Now," he said, "you are the most dangerous symbol in my world." Charlotte swallowed. "I don't want to be a symbol." Keldron nodded. "I know." He hesitated, then lowered his head slightly. A gesture of respect. Not ownership. Not dominance. Respect. "My court will demand a queen," he said. "Not because you are a trophy. Because you are a boundary the Covenant cannot cross without consequence." Charlotte's eyes stung. "And what do you demand?" Keldron's voice softened. "I demand nothing from you," he said. "Not your loyalty. Not your body. Not your future." Charlotte blinked, surprised by the gentleness. "I will offer," he continued, "what no one has offered you before." Charlotte whispered, "What?" Keldron held her gaze like a vow. "A choice," he said. Charlotte's chest ached. Because that, more than dresses, more than thrones, more than immortal kings, was the rarest kindness of all. Charlotte took a shaky breath. Then she said the truth. "I don't know how to be a queen." Keldron's mouth curved slightly, not a smile but the beginning of one. "Neither did I," he said. "At first." Charlotte swallowed. "And Fiona?" Keldron's eyes turned cold again. "She will face judgment," he said. "Not as my fiancée." He looked back at Charlotte. "But as my betrayer." Charlotte's heart pounded. "And me?" she asked softly. Keldron's gaze warmed, just a fraction. "You," he said, "will be protected until you choose otherwise." Charlotte's voice was barely audible. "And if I choose to stay?" Keldron's eyes held hers, and the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. "Then," he said quietly, "this kingdom will learn a new law." Charlotte whispered, "Which is?" Keldron's voice became velvet. "That power without kindness," he said, "is only hunger." Charlotte's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Because for the first time she wasn't invisible. She was seen. And she was still herself.